going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt here from NJ.com, here with Mike Kaye for the latest episode of the No Huddle Show. It's a reunion episode because the Eagles are only bringing back players who have ties to the Eagles. I mean, they just re-signed Vinny Curry. Oh, it's not official yet, but as of this recording, they are planning to re-sign Vinny Curry back to the team a year after they cut him. He was gone for so long. DeSean Jackson's already back. I believe Andrew Sendejo died in the NFC Championship game when LeGarrette Blount ran through him, so there's kind of an Eagles tie there. Well, I can't wait for LaShawn McCoy, Benny Logan, Kurt Coleman, Deion Lewis. Like, all these guys, they're coming back. We're bringing it back to the Chip Kelly era, guys.
I'm holding out for Colt Anderson right now.
Anderson.
You know,
hey,
that's
Najee Goody is a free agent.
Hey, Eldra Buckley, bring him back. That's my
Reno
guy.
Mahe.
Ooh, I like that.
We're just gonna start. Let's just yell out random Eagles players.
Reno Mahe's got the gas. If you really think about that one, Google it.
Like, we'll get into the Vinny Curry thing in a second, but it's so funny to me how I feel like this happens in Philadelphia in general. Like, guys that were popular here wind up back here. Like, it just, I don't know what it is about this. I mean, I'm sure Vinny Curry grew up an Eagles fan. He's from New Jersey. Like, it made sense when he was cut that they would go after him. But I don't think anybody predicted 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago that DeSean Jackson would be coming back.
Yeah, certainly not. And I think a lot of this falls under what Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman learned during the Chip Kelly era when they really... Chip Kelly came in and had that 1 year of control, and they got rid of all of these guys. They got rid of DeSean prior to that year, but
yeah,
I mean, that team was unlikable from an outside standpoint. Not that there weren't likable guys on there. Brent Selleck was there, Jason Kelce,
I don't know how much discipline there was, like, in that locker room either. Yeah.
Right, even though that was, like, the big thing.
Yeah.
They had a lot of guys that didn't seem like they wanted to be here, and they failed. And they failed miserably. And that's why Chip Kelly isn't a head coach, and that's why the Eagles won a Super Bowl, because Howie Roseman came back, learned from, other leagues about how I was talking to somebody who used to work with him in the scouting department a while back, and just marveled at the way he was able to reinvent himself. And, I think Howie's coming at it from a smart point of view. He's bringing guys that he knows personally. There's very little risk in bringing in the devil you know as opposed to the devil you don't know. He's also signing them to ridiculously team-friendly contracts, or at least for this year.
Even the Ronald Darby contract, which is supposed to be a 1 year contract, they threw on the dummy years at the end of it, so it reduced the cap hit to, like, minuscule amount. Like, the way he's doing it, like, I wrote something about how in 2020 it's going to be a little harder. Like, they'll be able to restructure and do a lot of the same. They're going to have a tougher time bringing on new players that aren't draft picks next year. And you can kind of just see that he's kind of going in on this year, especially, and next year, while Carson Wentz is still probably on either his rookie contract or his fifth-year option or one of those things.
Well, and that's another reason why, and you and I talked about this off air, but that's another reason why you're seeing them be so disciplined about compensatory picks. If you can get those extra third, fourth, fifth, sixth,
those
seventh,
are players on the depth chart.
Yeah, those are players on the depth chart, and they're cheap, right? So you're not only developing...
it's third rounder later, yeah.
Right, so you're developing guys, you're bringing in young talent, and right now they have a lot of older talent. I mean, you could argue they probably have their oldest... defensive line in forever. I mean, bringing back Vinny Curry while he is younger than Michael Bennett, who replaced him, and now he's replacing him, and I don't know. It's like this
really weird.
I don't know. It's like a...
Weren't we just here? They had the same defensive end rotation as a year
right,
before the Super Bowl run. I mean,
right. Yeah. So, it's like nothing changed, except for Tim Jernigan, I guess. But again,
still come back from this.
Again, I think they're making smart plays. They're playing. We talked about this in the last show that was 2 weeks ago. Part of the reason why we hadn't done another podcast is because they haven't been very busy. They've been playing the free agency market pretty well, and they made a safety signing that I think kind of came out of nowhere for us, but makes sense in the long run. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. And just before we get in, just time back to Howie for a second. You and I also talked about how you mentioned the compensatory pick thing. It's just amazing to me. Howie's not the only one doing this, but just how much of a conscious effort teams are making now. Like all the guys Howie's brought in, it's like 50% of it's because there was no risk of losing a compensatory pick. Malik Jackson was released. DeSean Jackson was a trade. Even if he had been released, it would have been the same thing. Vinny Curry was released. So the only guys that they signed that were not released were LJ Fort and Andrew Sendejo, we're about to talk about. And those are both kind of 1 year short. LJ Fort was technically 3 years, but it can amount to a 1 or 2 year deal. But the point being those are small contracts that would be 7th-round compensatory picks, and they cancel out 2 guys where they've already lost, I believe, 4, and they're probably going to lose Jay Ajayi as well, maybe Timmy Jernigan. So Howie's just clearly thinking about that. He's thinking about 2020, 2021 when he's signing free agents, which is not like a typical thing. It's a smart thing to do, but it's not a typical thing that these executives do.
Yeah, and to that point, a former scouting department guy who I talked to said he's looking at ways to do things differently. Like you mentioned, your great article about 2020, it's going to be a little bit tough to move things around. Not a lot of guys forward. A lot of GMs forward think with like the salary cap. He's forward thinking with like, hey, how am I going to get this 4th string defensive end next year when I know that Chris Long's probably not going to be here? Stuff like that. And he's using compensatory picks in a way that not only are they just draft ammunition, but they're trade ammunition as well.
And they traded a 3rd-round pick for Golden Tate.
Right. So I think you can go into this draft thinking, okay, cool. So Golden Tate just signed a deal that's probably going to net me a 4th or 5th round pick. Nick Foles is going to net me a 3rd round pick. Blah, 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 blah. So I can trade knowing that I'm going to have those picks. I'm basically trading liquid assets. If they trade a 3rd round pick with the top 2nd round pick to move up to 35, let's say, and draft a running back after selecting Christian Wilkins in the 1st round, the entire city of Philadelphia will, dance, the hora on this whole thing. I mean, like, this is like, but that's forward thinking. It's not just forward thinking with the roster. It's not just forward thinking with the salary cap. It's encompassing all of your moves and encompassing your depth chart in this way that, they knew when they released Vinny Curry that was going to create a need. So what did they do? They went out and they traded Marcus Johnson and Michael Bennett for peanuts. And then once they realized that Michael Bennett wasn't going to be around and they saw the way the free agent market was increasing because of all these releases, when you look at somebody like, Malik Jackson, like you said, and Vinny Curry, those two not only supplement what Bennett brought, but they actually improve upon it because you have 2 guys now that can fit in that rotation, play defensive end and defensive tackle.
And I thought it was interesting. I thought it was interesting when they traded Bennett that it was for a 2020 5th round pick instead of a 2019 one. Now, as of right now, they already have their own 7 picks. They have that 5th round pick, and they could get as many as 3 to 4 compensatory picks. Like, they have ammo. If they want to move up in April, they really have the chance to do so. And we mentioned Vinny. We haven't really talked about him coming back, in terms of what it means for the defensive line and stuff.
But let's stay in order. Let's talk about Zendejo.
I think that's fine. Okay, let's talk about Zendejo. So he's a 31-year-old safety who played on the Vikings for a while. He was injured for most of last season, but before that, he was pretty productive. Hard-hitting guy. All the Eagles fans jumped on this clip of LeGarrette Blount just running through him. It was one play. That happens, and LeGarrette Blount has run through much better players than him too. But he's an upgrade from Corey Graham as a 3rd safety.
Yeah, I got a lot of crap on Twitter about saying that they found their new Chris Maragos. Let me talk about that a little bit. So it's a philosophical point. It's not that it's not that he's of Maragos's talent level. It's not that he's not going to play on defense. But that special teams unit seemed like it didn't have a guy like a commander last year. And I think Zendejo, who was very good on special teams when he played for the Vikings initially in his career, I think he can come in along with his defensive role and play pretty well. I also think we're jumping to conclusions if we're saying, oh my gosh, he's getting handed this 3rd safety role because we haven't seen the contract. B, it's a 1-year deal. C, Trey Sullivan showed some promise. Maybe he's some competition. I just think the sleep on him is ridiculous. Oh, and by the way, there's a draft in April. So, and
they have all these cornerbacks too, and we don't know what they want to do with Devontae Maddox. They just re-signed Ronald Darby. They have 6 corners. Not all 6 can play.
Right. You've got to find a way to get your best 5 on the field. And I'm sorry to Zendejo, but
he's not like you have to put him on the field.
Right. Yeah. You know who you have to put on the field? Devontae Maddox.
So if that means he's safety, then he's safety.
Right. That's the thing to me. And frankly, if I were the Eagles right now, I would look at Maddox as my starting free safety, and I'd make Rodney McLeod my 3rd safety because A, he's on a 1-year deal. B, he's coming off a knee injury, so I don't know how much I can rely on him. And C, we've got to see what Maddox has. Maddox is the most promising guy in that secondary, in my opinion. You're paying a 1-year deal for Darby. Maybe he moves back to corner once Darby leaves, but for right now, you got to get him on the field. And, you've got Rasul Douglas, who you've invested in. You've got Sidney Jones, who you've invested in. You love Jalen Mills. Those three guys, one of those three guys is going to be your starting outside linebacker, or you're not starting outside linebacker, you're starting outside corner opposite Darby. And then I think Crayvon LeBlanc earned looks at that nickel spot. So you've got to get your best 5 on the field, or your best 6 in some cases. I just don't know where Zendaya fits in. I don't think it's as immediate of a placement as others do. But that said, from an external standpoint, clearly he's probably the favorite for the third safety role.
Yeah, and this is another one that just falls into like the Howie model of free agents. You sign a guy coming off an injury, his value's a little down, but he's shown to be a productive veteran in the past, willing to play a smaller role, though I'm sure he signed here with the intent of being their third safety. Whether that happens, we'll find out. It all depends on how he looks coming off that injury. If he's his full self, he deserves to be on the field, obviously. Mm-hmm. All right, then now let's touch on Curry. So we'd mentioned his name throughout the offseason as like a fallback plan, but it seemed like the way the Eagles were approaching this offseason, they didn't really have like a defensive end they were targeting. They got Brandon Graham back, and then the rest of the guys, it was either Vinny Curry or they'll just draft some guys, and they still might draft some guys. Mm-hmm. But as of right now, as it stands, if Chris Long returns, which is kind of the if that's hanging over this whole proceeding, you look at the same defensive end rotation as the Super Bowl run. Derek Barnett with a bigger role probably this time than he had then, because he kind of was split. I don't even know if he was technically starting.
He was
as a rookie. Yeah.
Vinny and Vinny
and Vinny won't be starting. He'll be playing a smaller role. He had his best season in terms of like Pro Football Focus grade with the Eagles 2 years ago, and he had his worst with the Buccaneers last year, though I think he was banged up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had an ankle injury.
He's as good as they were going to get for a fourth defensive end veteran guy, and there's nothing wrong. He knows how this system works. He's a popular figure in that locker room, which they value quite a bit. I mean, it's not a home run, but it's fine. It's fine.
Well, I think what's appealing about him, too, is you talk about his versatility. He can go inside on third down. And I think that's something that's really appealing when you consider that, Malik Jackson's here, Fletcher Cox is here, awesome, but the depth behind them is not very prominent. You know what I mean? Like, they have Trayvon Hester, who I think can develop into being a player. Bruce Hector, who knows? Let's say they draft a guy. Now you're in a position where, let's say you want to take an injury risk on somebody like Jerry Tillery, or you want to take an injury risk on somebody like Jeffrey Simmons. You've got enough juice inside, I guess you could say, to really do it because of Vinny Curry's versatility. Maybe you do that and then figure out what you want a running back and defensive end in the second round. I think they've give allotted themselves a lot of options and entering April's draft, and that's important because Howie needs to nail this one. He really does. Like there's no it's great we can talk about free agency, whatever, but this draft is going to set them up for the next 2 or 3 years when you consider the cap situation that you wrote about.
And with, Jason Peters, at this point, he's probably retiring, even if he won't want to.
Right.
Chris Long, if he's not retiring now, he will be next year. Mm-hmm. And, these guys they signed are in their 30s. Like, they have a lot of things. Malcolm Jenkins is going into his 30s. Rodney McLeod won't be here next year, I would guess. So they have a lot to figure out. So a little preview for the morning. I have a story coming where I said what I think they should do on the defensive line next. You mentioned Jeffrey Simmons. I think they should re-sign Timmy Jernigan to a cheap 1-year deal, make him your third defensive tackle, take a risk on Jeffrey Simmons, let him sit out the year if he has to, because you don't need him at that point, and then draft a defensive end in the second round.
I like that. Spoiler alert.
Because all those defensive ends are in their 30s. You need a younger guy. We don't really know what Josh Sweat is at this point. I don't think it's fair to give up on him yet after 1 year.
Well, and to that point, sorry to cut you off, but to that point, Derek Barnett, coming off shoulder surgery, so he's young, but again, you
need to hedge your bets at defensive end and just get as many guys as you can. We touched on Darby a little bit. It made sense to bring him back. I'm guessing, this is purely just a guess, I haven't heard anything, that some of it has to do with his injury, is why he didn't get as much injured. I mean, his injuries, he's been pretty injury prone. I'd be pretty surprised if he was ready for the very start of the season, or at least training camp. I'd be shocked if he was there day one on training camp. So it makes sense why he would come back on 1-year deal. They clearly really like him. It's kind of a low-risk thing for them. If he comes back and is healthy and looks like what he's capable of, then you have like a top-flight cornerback. If not, you can move on from him next year.
Darby allows them to kind of see where they want everybody else long term. I think we brought up Avonte Maddox possibly starting at free safety. Look, there's a lot of people that think this is going to make Rasul Douglas expendable. There are people that I've talked to that think this is going to make him expendable behind the scenes. I think that would be an utter mistake. You've got this guy for 2 more years on a cheap contract. You've got to sign Carson Wentz. You're going to have to fill out this roster. I think he showed a lot of potential. If you were to hand Jalen Mills the job, I think that'd be a mistake. Let him, Rasul, and Jones compete for this job. That's what I want to see. You're probably going to start the year with Jones and Mills starting a corner if Darby can't play. But I don't see why you wouldn't have Rasul Douglas compete there. I get the intrigue of putting Avonte Maddox there, but if you're going to have Avonte Maddox play a role, let him stick somewhere and let him see what he's got. What do you think?
The funny thing is, the 2 guys that they're so attached to are Ronald Darby and Jalen Mills. Both of those guys are going to be free agents next year. Mm-hmm. Whereas you have guys like Rasul Douglas under contract for a few more years and had a better year than either of them last year if you take it as a whole. Avonte Maddox, they've under contract for a few more years and had a better season than anybody in their secondary besides Malcolm Jenkins last year.
Yep.
Cre'Von LeBlanc is on a really cheap 1-year deal. If he shows some of what he showed last year, then I think they might sign him to an extension during the season. I think they should. So those are the 3 cornerbacks I would personally build around. They seem to still like Sidney Jones. I still have question marks about his ability to stay healthy. And Jalen Mills and Ronald Darby are extremely inconsistent as much as they like them. So if I was building the secondary, I would do it around those 3 guys I mentioned. I wouldn't do it. I like Jalen Mills more than maybe most do, but I wouldn't build the secondary around him like they seem to want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think at some point you have to have an honest conversation and say, hey, are we going to sign Mills to an extension? And if we sign him to an extension, what's that going to look like? How does he compare to everybody else in the league? And if your answers involve a lot of pause, then it's clear you have to build the team elsewhere. If they want to move him to free safety or to the 3rd safety role to get him on the field because he is such a great leader and he is, he can be a good player at times, then do it. But, to sacrifice your future for the present when the present isn't fantastic doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
So, we talked about their 3 most recent moves. Let's talk about their overall offseason. We talked a little bit about how he's approached this offseason. Do you feel like they're better today, not factoring in what's coming still, do you think they're better today than they were when they lost to the Saints?
Wow. There's some pause there, so maybe I should rethink what I'm doing.
You have other things you have to consider. Injured guys, Carson Wentz, full health. I mean, Ronald Darby was out, Jalen Mills was out.
Yeah, if everybody's fully
Ronnie
healthy, yes, absolutely. I think Malik Jackson is, knowing him and having covered him, I think Malik Jackson's an incredible upgrade over having Haloti Ngata and Trevon Hester start for 13 games. Yes, absolutely.
So in that sense, it's been a successful offseason then, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I think this is definitely, DeSean Jackson's an upgrade over Torrey Smith and Mike Wallace over the last 2 years. I would say, too, knowing that you have a defensive end like Brandon Graham locked up is really important. They were able to hold on to some of their guys that they really think are important, and I think building that camaraderie in another year together is important.
So the one looming question, which has been an Eagles topic of conversation for the last, since Nam, really.
Does it start with an R and end with a B?
It doesn't end with a B. It ends
with technically, I know, but
I see what you're saying, the initials. Yes, running back.
Yes, thank you for playing at home, everyone.
As I've said, I was on a radio show recently, and I said we should have learned at this point that we shouldn't go into an offseason expecting them to go after the top running back, so they're just not going to do it. Right. I'm not as crazy concerned as everybody else seems to be. You can, the fact that there's so many guys that we've all talked about as candidates for them who haven't signed anywhere. What I imagine will happen will be something like what happened 2 years ago. They waited. They drafted Donald Pumphrey. It didn't work out. They drafted Donald Pumphrey, though. They signed Corey Clement. We can pretend Clement was the guy they drafted. So they got the rookie, and then they waited, and they signed LeGarrette Blount. I believe it was after the draft, right? It was during the summer. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the direction I see it going. They see what they can get in the draft. Maybe they get a Miles Sanders in the second round. Maybe they wait until the 4th round and get somebody like Justice Hill or one of those other guys. I don't know how they approach it. They're not. I'm still not convinced they would do it a first-round pick, even though everybody loves Josh Jacobs. It seems like he didn't have a great pro day, but everybody's still raving about him, and there's been some people who think the Eagles would consider him. Like I said, until the Eagles do something to convince us they're going to use valuable assets on running back, let's stop trying to convince ourselves that they're going to do that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm torn because I do value the running back position, but I also...
Well, you like fullbacks, too, to be
I
fair.
do, too. Yeah, that's
You're coming at this from a different perspective.
Right, yeah, I'm old school. I formation, baby. No, my issue with drafting a running back is you're drafting a running back at 25. And so go on this journey with me. So I'm a big believer that if you really like a quarterback or a defensive end, you don't trade back to get him. You know what I mean?
You get him where you are.
You get him where you are, you trade up. And I think letting a running back fall to 25 means he's not that great.
If he was, he would be getting picked in the top 10. Yeah.
Right. And so to spend an asset like that on a running back is really tough for me. That said, they really like Miles Sanders. I know this to be true. He is going to be a top 40 pick, and they're going to have to trade up for him.
And their second-round picks are in the 50s. So.
Right. So, again, you look at the compensatory picks in the future, maybe you're dealing future third-round picks, future second-round picks to move up if you really love a guy. I like the guys after Jacob. I like Jacobs a lot. I think he's the best guy in the class.
But the guys after him he's not so far ahead of the other guys.
Right, the distance is...
It's not Saquon to... I mean, last year's running back class is good, too, actually.
Right.
It's not Saquon to whoever was second last year.
Right. There's not a major drop-off between Jacobs, who was a one-year wonder and actually
put up the starter, really.
Right, and put up worse numbers than Miles Sanders. You got my guy, Darrell Henderson.
David Montgomery also.
David Montgomery, who they've met with at the Combine. They met with all these guys.
Those would be those three guys you just mentioned are kind of the ones I have my eye on.
Yeah, I think they try to get Saunders, but I think they inevitably either get Henderson or Montgomery.
So you're convinced they're going to use a second round pick on one then?
Absolutely. There's no way they walk out of the first 2 rounds without a running back. From what I've been told.
I could see. I mean, they have 2 second round picks that are in the 50s. If they really like a guy, I could see them either using both of those, using one in a next year pick to move up in the second round, and using the 25 pick on a Jeffrey Simmons or a defensive lineman.
Yeah, I'll give you a scenario in a second, but the other guy I want to talk about, if they do somehow, a bunch of guys drop to them in the second round, and they're like, oh my god, this is a starting linebacker for the next 4 years. Oh, this is if we value the position a little bit more, or we think the need is bigger, if you're the Eagles. 4th round, 5th round, Alex Barnes from Kansas State. I really, really like him. He's a guy I think who long-term could develop into a notable guy. To me, he's TJ Yeldon, but can actually run forward. I don't really understand the obsession with TJ Yeldon. That said...
To be honest, I wouldn't even be shocked. Absolutely shocked if they got a running back in the 2nd or 4th and then used their 6th or traded into the 7th round and just got a guy to try out and push the other guys. The only ones they have returning right now are Josh Adams, Wendell Smallwood, Corey Clement, and Boston Scott. The only one that you could say for sure is a lock to make the team would be Corey Clement and probably Smallwood because they like him so much. But if they got enough guys that are better than Wendell Smallwood, he wouldn't be a lock to make the team anymore.
For sure. I mean, I still...
And Sproles is still a wild card. I don't think he's coming back.
Yeah,
I wouldn't bring him back. I know we apologized for weeks about how we were wrong about him, but you have to move on.
Well, and I mean, if he's contemplating retirement this late into free agency, I mean, you've had...
He did it last year, too, to be fair.
I know,
yeah.
Right, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I don't think it really benefits you if you're contemplating retirement instead of training or have your mind focused. That said, and we also saw how that worked out with Corey Graham. That said, let me give you a scenario.
Love scenarios.
So I think you and I, our consensus top guy at 25 is Christian Wilkins, correct?
Yeah,
is that fair
based on the way we've seen mocks going and boards going. And
right.
Stuff, yeah.
If he's gone, and somebody like Dalton Risner's gone,
and none of those edge guys are there,
and none of the edge guys are there. If you're the Eagles, do you look at the success you had trading back last year, where you traded your first-round pick is basically to land Dallas Goedert, Avonte Maddox, and a second-round pick, which might be the most underrated trade in the entire draft last year.
Especially because of those 2 players.
Right, good. Those are the 2 best players. Do you look back and say, look, I'll trade back, let's see, the last 3 picks in the first round, so 30 through 32, or I'm going to trade to maybe 34 or 35, maybe the Cardinals want to move up and I can get to 33, and then I nab my running back. But now I've also got some extra draft ammunition. I've added a 3rd round pick, which I didn't have before. I probably have a 5th round pick, and then next year I probably have a 3rd round pick too. That's a pretty good haul. From there, now I don't feel so bad about taking a running back. I'm in the 30s. I got value. I'm getting a running back in a third-round pick. So from there, if Jacobs isn't there, let's say Jacobs gets drafted by the Raiders.
That would be the one I would have.
Right. That would be the team that I would think would be the team. Let's say he gets drafted by the Raiders. They pick what, 23rd or 24?
They pick 24, yeah, right before the Eagles.
Okay, so let's say the Raiders do that. Maybe they trade up a little just because they're afraid the Eagles might jump them. From there, if I'm the Eagles and Christian Wilkins and Jacobs and all those guys aren't there, I'm trading back. I put out a scenario that I traded back to 32 with the Patriots because they wanted to jump up and grab some dude. I don't remember off the top of my head. At 32, we talked about it before, Jeffrey Simmons. Not only have I added maybe a third-round pick and some change, but I'm adding a guy for the future that I know can...
A lottery ticket right there.
Yeah, you've got a lottery ticket.
And extra picks, yeah.
Yeah, so from there, then I feel good. Now with that extra third-round pick, I'm using that extra third-round pick to trade up into the 30 to 40 range.
Like Miles Sanders or something.
Get Miles Sanders. So I'm walking... Then I still have my other second-round pick, which is at 57.
Or offensive tackle or something.
Right, an offensive tackle, a defensive end, whatever you want to do. Enjoy it, honey. But, like, I just think that the moves that they've made, and I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to hold water here. I'm really not. I think they've been very smart and deliberate with every single move they've made because of those compensatory picks, because of the way the draft's shaking out, because of how Howie views this team currently. I think he has really set him up to be open to all possibilities, and I think having those 2 second-round picks is, an ace in the hole.
I not only agree with your scenario, I think the trade back is going to happen. I think the guys that they would draft at number 25, the Christian Wilkinses, the Cleveland Farrells, if they really like Jared Hillary, he'd probably be there, but they could probably get him in the second round if they liked him that much. Like you said, though, you pick the guys you really like when they're available, but I think they're going to get to 25, and the pickings for the defensive end, defensive tackle group won't be amazing, and I think it would behoove them to move back.
I totally agree. I think it's smart. I mean, it's smart business, right?
Especially as we're talking about, they need those depth pieces, and that their roster, their only needs coming in this offseason were really depth pieces, especially once they got DeSean and Malik Jackson.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and you're going to add young depth, and you have 7 picks right now. You might end up with 9 or 10 by the time it's all over. I don't think they need that many picks, but competition should be pretty open. And
also, I'll say I've been going all in on this, so I'm going to get called out if it actually does happen. I still am pretty confident they're not going to draft a corner in the first round. I've still seen mock drafts where they're like, yeah, they don't even mention that they re-signed Darby. It's like I get that it's hard to follow every single team, but it's like, come on, at least you got to mention that stuff.
I'm actually kind of hoping.
I've gone so all in on it that I'm going to be very hardcore called out if I get it wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that are probably, I'm hoping they just draft Trayvon Mullen from Clemson just to be like. And the way they'll announce it.
Funny thing, that was like Mel Kiper's pick before Ronald Darby resigned, and then he had a conference call, and I basically asked him, and somebody responded, I think you flushed it in a little bit, because I was like, so why exactly did you have them pick? They've picked 4 cornerbacks in the last 3 years, and they have so-and-so coming back. Why did you draft them, Trayvon Mullen, exactly? he deflected and started talking about receivers or something.
It's rough.
It's rough.
We're calling out legends on the podcast. As we wrap up here, the position I'm actually kind of there are a couple of positions I'm intrigued by. I want to throw them out there. Third tight end. I'm very intrigued by the linebacker competition. From our mindset, they're not going to draft a linebacker in the first 3 rounds. But then you have a competition of LJ Ford, who I like. You have Paul Rollo, who I like, and then you have Nate Gary. And so
they could add another guy there. Yeah.
They could add another guy, and so I'm intrigued at what they do with linebacker.
They could still draft a safety, honestly. That mostly depends on how they feel about Trey Sullivan's potential, but
So again, I think that there's going to be a lot of potential for surprises in this, and how he's going to have
but
to be
not a corner in the first round.
Right. Maybe they'll take a long snapper, and we'll all be wrong.
If they do it at this point, it'll be because they're trolling me. They won't even like the guy.
Howie's just
just give me a corner, I don't care.
I know we both have Rose in our last names, but I don't like you very much.
I don't like this guy. All right, we'll end on that note. This was a fun one. We'll come back. We'll hit you guys back probably after I get back from the owners' meetings. I'll be heading out there over the weekend. There will be a lot of stuff going on there. I'm sure Howie Roseman will talk, Doug Peterson, and Jeffrey Lurie. There'll be a lot of stuff going on. There'll be rule change discussion. There'll be some Robert Kraft discussion. I'm sure that will be a lot of the hubbub out there.
Enjoy it.
But we'll end on that note. If you guys have any questions, be sure to send them to us, and we'll try and answer them on the next episode. And thanks for listening.